My friends, tonight we're finishing this T29E3, which was the main event on this channel for the past few weeks. We started with the construction, then we've put some paints on it. Then, unexpectedly, we focused on the lower hull, added some chipping, a lot of chipping, then some real-life dirt, pre-dusting, all the details had to be painted, then a nice satisfying round of pin washes. We also painted the shell impacts, some fake leather, and last week was pretty exhausting, although the video was pretty short. Well, let's now pick up where we left off, which means more rust effects. I know. The chipping color which we use on this model is called dark rust, which should theoretically take care of two effects in one step. Chipping and, well, rust. But not on my watch. Chipping is always a multiple stage process for me, okay? However, I made sure to keep the rust washes as subtle as possible, which sometimes means I had to go over the blended effect several times and remove the paint if it was too much. When we were chipping the previous model on this channel, the Panzer II, which was painted grey, I talked briefly about how rust effects interact with different base coats. Light paints such as German yellow or white are pretty hard, because rust, it kinda stands out like a sore thumb on them, or like we say in Slovakia, like a fist to the eye. German grey is a whole new can of worms, because grey acts as a good base coat for rusty steel surfaces, and if you're not careful, a Panzer grey tank can quickly turn into a raw steel machine from the assembly line. But green finishes, that's pure heaven, because rust gives them a very nice, warm hue and makes them look richer. This model has spots of black though, which isn't really black, it's made from different shades of dark grey. So that brings us back to my point about grey and rust effects. So, let me put it in some normal human speech. Blending rust tones on the olive drab was fun, but blending it on the black spots, not so much. I had to be more careful here. I also made sure to keep them extra smooth on the cast surfaces, such as on the turret. I've been told that these types of cast metals don't rust as fast as regular rolled steel. I don't have a PhD in rust physics, but it sounds interesting, so I gave it a try. Anyway, moving on. The next chapter in this anime is Stowage. Now, to be honest, I already did some painting on the other side, but in the end I just hated the color, so I'm gonna repaint them. But let's take it one small inconvenience at a time. Painting the rope wasn't the most satisfying thing in the world. I used regular sewing string, and although I dipped it into diluted PVA glue, it remained extremely fuzzy. I tried cheating a little by not painting all the protruding fuzz, but still, the result isn't what I was hoping for. Honestly, I have no idea what's the best material for tiny ropes on models, so if you have any good tips, I'm all ears. The main body color for the Stowage will be light matte from Vallejo, darkened with a small amount of burnt umber from AK. Again, Fury was a good source of inspiration for this, and as it turns out, US backpacks have this very light greyish tan color, and light matte from Vallejo is pretty much a perfect match. Much better than my previous attempt where I used buff as a base coat. Shadows were mixed by adding more burnt umber into the mix. My last attempt at painting Stowage led me to this caveman technology technique which will make miniature painters cringe, like, extremely hard, because I'm not really bothered by smooth color transitions or anything of that sort. My goal is just blocking out the shadows, and by blocking I mean slapping them in appropriate places. Deeper shadows mean more burnt umber. No exact ratios, just, making sure it's visibly darker than the previous layer. And these are applied more sparingly. Not only are they focused on the more shadowed places such as deep folds and towards the bottom of each pack, but they also cover smaller surface. This way I'm able to create a color gradient, even though it's the exact opposite of smooth, but we'll take care of that soon, okay? But first we need to add highlights. These were mixed from light matte and a small amount of Dectan. The first layer is just slightly lighter than the base coat. You'd barely notice the difference, but what's the point then? Well, I can use it to tidy up some of the rougher looking shadows. For example, if I accidentally brush the dark color where it shouldn't be, I can use this paint to fix that. It's also easy to smoothen out some of the harsh color gradients between shadow number 1 and the base coat. Second highlight was mixed from the same paints, I just added more deck tan. Now I'm focusing in more on the upper surfaces and all those folds which are facing upwards. Not the protruding parts, because that would look as if the whole part was just dry brushed. Here's a small pro tip. Oh, well, no, not a pro tip. just a tip, okay? So, taking a quick phone picture against one strong light source can give you a very clear idea on where to place lights and shadows, and you can have it in front of you the whole time, and it truly makes the process easier. The final highlight was added as a sort of accent color. Is that the right word? Accent? It just, outlines and stresses out the contours of each fold, but again, it's painted from the upper side, so it follows the natural light source. Now, you might have probably noticed that all Stowage pieces are painted in the same color, which is like so boring, right? But here's where glazes enter the chat. This pack was glazed with Russian uniform, which gave it a slightly military green tint. But not only that, glazes soften the harsh transitions between individual layers. This small pouch was glazed with old wood. Same story, and as a result it has a slight brown tint. And this one was treated with flat earth, for even stronger brown hue. I honestly can't remember what I used for the last backpack because I didn't film it, but you get the picture. It's completely up to you, but it's good to have some color references at hand, which is how I came up with this idea. Instead of painting each one separately and spending hours on them, using glazes was much faster and, in fact, easier. Let's now create some, acrylic washes. Those packs have clearly visible sewing lines, both in real life and in miniature. These come from a resin set from Legend and they're very detailed, so obviously I wanted to take full advantage of that. I see miniature painters using this method quite frequently. You take a dark brown color, in this case burnt umber again, and paint it along those sewing lines. It can be also used to outline details such as those straps, but to be honest, I'm absolutely terrible at this and I'd be more comfortable using oil paints. It looks terrible, I know, but you'll see how most of it can be refined. As an example, once I painted the straps with old wood, most of the excessive outlining disappeared. Same with the metal parts, which were picked out using a medium gray color. Again, the outlining becomes finer. And last but not least, another painting trick, highlighting the sewing lines with a lighter color. This makes the Stowage look more detailed, but it has to be done with moderation, which is something I need to practice more before I find the sweet spot. As an armor modeler, I'm more confident with oil paints, so just like on the Panzer II, I cheated a little by emphasizing the deepest shadows with them. They also helped me to refine some of the poorly drawn outlines, so in the end, it was an absolute win in my opinion. And I also applied them with the speckling method, which gives the fabric a nice, gritty, filthy, well-used look. And the metal parts were polished with a pencil. Whew, okay, I'm done with Stowage stuff. I know it was a lot, but hey, small stuff like this deserves just as much attention as the model. The remaining pieces were painted using the same techniques, just with different colors, such as field wrap, Russian uniform, even German field grey, because why not? Anyway, time for some enamel mud tones. The lower hull is already finished and we need to match it with the upper hull. As such, we'll use the same colors. But there's gonna be something a little different about it this time. You see, I found a more efficient and, dare I say, better looking method for these effects. Instead of brushing them and then blending, you speckle them and then do the blending. It might seem a bit hard to control at times, especially when you apply it on the upper surfaces, but it's actually quite the opposite. You can easily wipe any unwanted specks away, and it's actually hard to overdo. And of course, speckling equals texture. Texture good. Second layer is a darker mud tone. This one was added more sparingly because, as always, we're going for that gradual transition between dry, damp and wet mud. To avoid accidentally damaging the dry mud layer, I left that one to dry overnight and continued the next day. First thing in the morning, actually. I didn't use much speckling this time though, just on the lower parts of the hull. It's because most of the damp mud is concentrated in corners and thus a good old brush application is easier. Also, the natural debris absorbs these paints really well, and it's very easy to achieve very authentic looking results. It's also a nice way to blend the stowage with the tank even further, of course trying to keep it all subtle, moderation is the key. The final layer is my homemade dirty water mixture. You just have to add a significant amount of dark enamel wash into the previous paint, and then continue with even more enamel gloss. Then you just mix it all together and you'll have a dark, glossy, translucent water mix. This bad boy prefers to be applied with brushes because he's very thick and viscous and as such doesn't do well with speckling. Of course, splattering the paint is faster and easier, but with some practice you can paint random stains of water on your own. This is probably the greatest way to add contrast between different parts of the model, and there's absolutely no such thing as overdone if your tank is situated in a gloomy season such as autumn or winter. Okay, we can speculate about how realistic it is in some places, but the way I see it, it comes down to your own personal style. Also, if this model was dusted with dry pigments, you could use pure enamel gloss which would make them look darker, and the result would be roughly the same. However, this mixture can be applied in places with little to no earth effects, and as such works on clean surfaces as well, which gives you even more options when it comes to adding contrast between details. Let's now finish it off with some greasy stains. This is probably the only 502 Abteilung oil paint which dries glossy, even if you drain it on cardboard for, I don't know, 10 hours. Which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense, of course. Grime usually is glossy, but the effect is actually pretty easy to control, because, you see, just like with most glossy weathering paints, the more you blend it, the flatter it becomes. So it's totally possible to achieve those smooth gradients ranging from flat textured translucent stains to a heavier and darker and glossier grime buildup. I must say, oil paints are becoming my new favorite toy, and chances are I might weather the next model completely with them. They're just really pleasant to use. The last weathering touch was of course polishing every worn edge with graphite. It's definitely one of the easiest yet most boring techniques. It's just too monotonous for me, but the results are totally worth it. Sometimes I feel lazy and give it a pass on smaller scale models, but in 1/35th scale, you know, every technique has its purpose, especially if you want your model to look extra heavy metal. Something that I always keep for the very end are antennas. Those were again made from stretch spruce and fixed with superglue, because modeling cement would disintegrate them. They were painted with a dark gray color, but this time I decided to tie them down. I had this flexible airplane rigging thingy which I received from a buddy of mine, and it's been laying around for years probably. I just never had any use for it because me and airplanes, can you imagine that? But, you know, it came in super handy for this task. You can stretch it to about 5 times its length, which makes it very easy to keep it straight and tensioned. And that, my friends, is the finish line, at least for the tank. There's more stuff that needs to be done which is related to this project. For example, next week will be about figures. Yeah, those sweet resin tankers from Alpine which I bought for this model. Also, I'll be doing a diorama for it, and if everything goes well, there will be a building. Or 2 buildings. Of course, I'm gonna document everything in detail, so there's gonna be a video about figures, one about muddy terrain, and one about buildings. In other words, we'll take a break from tanks, but it's still gonna be related to this model. So I hope you enjoyed this series, and if you did, leave me a like or a dislike if you didn't like it. And thanks a lot for watching, I appreciate it a lot. Also, I'd like to give a big shout out to my patrons who not only make this weekly show possible, but they also gave me some valuable feedback for this model. So yeah, cheers mates, I appreciate it. I post on Patreon almost every day with updates from all my projects, so that's how you can know what I've been up to and give me feedback if I do an oopsie. I also post 1 week early ad-free videos, so you'd be able to watch the next one about figures. There's also DMs so we can get in touch, and those beautiful studio photos which you can download in full resolution. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this week. It was a long video. I think I have 21 minutes of audio footage. I don't know how long it's gonna be when I cut it down. So I hope it was worth watching. And until the next one, you all stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, those models won't build themselves, so you know what to do. Okay, cheers mates.